Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a wishlist video. So I have no product to show you today, obviously, but I wanted to share with you what is on my wish list for when my eyeshadow no buy is over. If you haven't been following my... I'm not wearing lipstick. Just realized I'm not wearing lipstick. Let me fix that real fast. That's better. So, as I was saying, I don't have anything to share with you physically today, but I thought it would be good to go through my wish list and talk you through like what I want to buy. If you haven't been following my beauty budget, I am on a no buy for eyeshadow this year. I am allowed to buy other things, but it's just eyeshadow that I'm on a no buy for. So I do have quite a long list now of palettes that are on my wish list. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to pick up all of them like now once my no buy is over, or maybe ever, but there are the palettes that I've been lusting after, and yeah, I'm just going to talk you through them. So before I jump into the bulk of the video, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. Okay, so I'm going to go through somewhat in brand order. And first up, we have a brand that I have quite a long list for, and you might be able to guess which brand it is if you know my collection and if you know like my taste and stuff like that. Also, it's a brand that I want to invest more palettes into, like more money into palettes for. I want to kind of replace other palettes in my collection with these, both because I love the color story, the quality is nice, and also because the shadows are magnetic, so I can use them with my singles. And the brand that I'm talking about is Natasha Denona. So again, I have quite a long list of palettes that I want from her, so let me go through them. First up, let's start with the kind of midi palettes. And for the midi palettes, the first palette I want to mention is the Glam palette. I will insert them somewhere here on the screen while I'm talking about them. But the Glam palette is her kind of cool-toned type of palette. I know there's like a little bit more warmth in there too. And she recently released I Need a Nude as well, which I'll talk about soon, which is also more cool tone. But that is a bit more rosy cool tone. This is more kind of, I don't know, taupey leaning. And again, it does have a little bit of warmth to it. I know some people don't say it's fully cool toned, but it's like the kind of cool tone palette that I like, because I like cool tones, especially now more than I did before. However, I'm not like a mega cool tone person. I go for warm tones way more often. And if I do go for cool tones, I don't go for the super like silvery cool tones, if that makes sense. So I think this is a really nice palette, and I think it would be a nice palette to add into my collection. Again, because I don't have too many cool tone eyeshadows in my collection. So that is first up on my list. The second eyeshadow palette from Natasha Denona is the Pastel Palette. Again, this is another midi palette. This is a palette that I want to add in because it does have a little bit more color to it. And I don't really have a lot of like pastel shades in my collection. And I don't really have a specifically pastel palette. So I do have like the pastel shades, I guess, across palettes, but it would be fun to have this palette because it would mean that I have a specific palette for pastels. I know that there are other options out there for pastel palettes if you want to like not spend so much money, but again, I do really like the Natasha Denona formula, and I know the pastel palette has a lot of the like what's it called, cream to powder matte. That's what they are. And I really like that formula, so I would be really intrigued to try this palette out. So that is second up on my wish list. The third palette is a palette that is right up my alley, and it's one of her newest releases, and that is the Yaka Palette. I think that's how you say it, right? Yaka Palette, which is like the grungy green, like warm-toned, like swamp kind of greens, which I love. I love these type of shades. I mean, I'm wearing greens today, but today I'm wearing more like, I don't know, more like green greens, like not like those swampy kind of undertones. But I do love those type of shades, and I think this palette would be so stunning. There are a few shades in here that are very similar to each other, which I feel like Natasha Denona does a lot. There's a lot of overlapping shades within her like same palettes, which, you know, isn't perfect, but overall I just love these type of undertones. If I'm being honest, I don't think this will be like the first palette that I pick up from her after my no buy is over. I think the two that I've already mentioned and some that I'm going to mention later is probably higher on the list, but it's definitely one that I am lusting over, especially because like the undertones of the greens, and also like the new formulas within this palette, like those kind of more wet effect, those more kind of exciting sparkly shades. I think this one and the I Need a Nude palette have that kind of formula. It is again a newer formula to her, so yeah, that is another palette that's on my wish list. And honestly, I'm just like, I get so excited every time I see this palette because those undertones are so me. The next midi palette, which is actually the second to last midi palette, is the My Dream palette. This is a palette that wasn't necessarily on my wish list to start. When it first came out, I didn't really see it as a palette that I would want. I felt like it was too, like it ran too deep for me. I had these shades over and over. It had like a bit more purple to it, which, you know, I don't always want, but I feel like also when this came out, I had just finished panning my Modern Renaissance palette, which I know the undertones aren't exactly the same, but it also has like more kind of purpley pink undertones to it, and maybe that was why I was burnt out on those shades, and this just didn't appeal to me. The more I stare at this palette, the more I am intrigued, the more I want it. I feel like it's a good staple palette, and there is so much more variety to it than those kind of undertones that I just already mentioned, like the kind of purpley pink undertones and then the darkness. There's a lot of other things to it too, and I think this would be a really, really good all-rounded palette. I think it would also give a little bit more variety to my collection, especially my Natasha Denona collection, because it does have those like deeper undertones. So yeah, that is another one that is on my wish list. Again, it's not like the most high up palette on the wish list, but again, it is growing for me, so it's probably one that I'm gonna pick up at some point. But I'm just gonna have to decide which order I want to pick up this palette, because again, the list is quite long. And then lastly, for the midi palettes, we do have the I Need a Nude palette. This is definitely a palette that I don't need. I know I don't need it. I have very similar palettes in my collection. I did do like my, what was that video called? Was it like my favorite boring neutral palettes? And in there, I covered like all my neutral palettes, and I did mention as well that a lot of those palettes were similar to this palette. So I know I don't need it, but I do want it. I love Natasha Denona, and again, this has those kind of more exciting shimmer formulas in it too. And I know it's like a palette that I would use a lot, but again, I already have these shades in my collection, so it's probably one that I might pick up like to replace other palettes in my collection at some point. But for now, I don't think I'm going to pick it up yet. I think it's going to be on my wish list for a while until I can get through some other palettes in my collection, and then like replace it with like a better formula with that undertone, if that makes sense. So that is the I Need a Nude palette, and again, the last of the midis. Then we do have the Glam face palette, which is, I guess, more of a face palette, but it also has eyeshadows in it, so that's kind of why I wanted to include it in this listing. I really, really want this palette. I have actually asked for it for my birthday, so I don't know if I'm going to get it or not, but basically it has a blush and a highlighter, which I feel like are stunning, and then it has, I think it's 5 eyeshadows, right? Or 6, I think 5 at the bottom, and I want it in the light version. I feel like this would be a perfect like everyday palette. The eyeshadows in there are stunning. Again, I heard that the shimmers in here are more kind of sparkly again and more like effective, which I love, and I'm so intrigued to try this palette. It has been on my wish list since it came out, and it lives rent-free in my head. I can't stop thinking about this palette, and again, I think it's just like an all-around beautiful palette, and also the blush and the highlighter looks like something that I would really, really enjoy too. So this is definitely something that I will pick up at some point. Maybe I will get it for my birthday, like I said, but if I don't, I might pick this one up first from the list. We'll see. So that is the Glam Face palette. Moving on to the larger palettes, I have 2 palettes that are like the larger size. The next one is the largest of them all, which is the Green Brown palette. This is one that I have had on my wish list for years now, but it's actually going a bit lower down on priority. It's one that I have lusted over for a long, long time. However, with how my preferences is and how my collection is, I don't think this is one that I might pick up. You know, it's still on my list because if I can get a good deal on it, or, you know, maybe I will fall back in love with the palette and pick it up at some point. But realistically, I don't think I'm going to pick this one up because it is very shimmer heavy, and I have so many beautiful shimmers in my single eyeshadow collection. And also, it's just so large. I think it's like 28 shades, right? So, I mean, like, it's not like the largest of shadows. It's not like it's 50 shades or whatever. But it's still quite a large palette. And obviously, the size of the pans are the larger Natasha Denona pan as well, which is a lot of eyeshadow. So, it is one that I am still thinking about, but I'm not sure if I will pick up anymore. However, like I said, it is still on my list. And again, you know I love greens. I'm wearing greens today, so it is definitely something that is up my alley. But yeah, I'm not sure about this palette anymore, but I just want to mention it. However, the next large palette is one that I really am lusting after. And originally I wanted it for the shimmers in this palette, because you will understand in a second. But I actually want this more for the mattes now. And that is the Triochrome palette, or Triochrome, right? Triochrome. And again, I wanted it because it had like the 3 multichromes in it, but now I am so intrigued by the undertones of the mattes. The mattes just seem so stunning, so unique, and I do think like this would be really hard to dupe out in my collection. So I think this would add something really unique to my collection, and since I can take the eyeshadows out and use them in my singles, I can use it in like BYOPs for travel palettes. So this is another one that is probably quite high up on the list out of the palettes, and I know, like, I mean, there's other things that I probably would want equally as much, but I know that this one will bring something new to my collection, which is probably why it's a bit higher up. And this is a palette though that I will seriously consider buying, like pre-owned, pre-loved, if I can find a good deal, because like, I don't know, it's a larger palette, so they are quite expensive, and I don't think it's necessarily a color story that I will use every single day. But again, it is a really high up there palette for me, and I would love to try this one out, especially because of the undertones and like the 3 rows as well. Each row has a different theme, and yeah, it's just something about the undertones of the mattes that are just like muted but still colorful and like unique, and I'm in love with this palette. So that is the next one. Okay, so we still have quite a few palettes to go. We have 3 more Natasha Denona palettes to go. Next up is the Cranberry Palette, which is another one that I have had on my wish list for a long time. It is, again, going a little bit lower down on the list now. It's not something that I feel like I necessarily need. But again, this is one that I might buy pre-owned or pre-loved if I can find it. But again, it's not like the highest on the list anymore. I just love the undertones in here. I love like the shimmers and the mattes together. And again, I would love to have this because you can actually take out the pans in this one. So I could both mix it in with my other larger Natasha Denona palettes, but I could also use the palette itself to make my own like travel Natasha Denona palettes with my larger pans. So that is the Cranberry Palette. Then we do have 2 mini palettes that are on my list. We have the mini Glam palette, which is more cool toned. And then we have the mini Nude. I do have a little bit of a disclaimer though. I haven't posted this video yet. I'm going to do my beauty budget update at some point. But I did actually buy like value set from Cult Beauty. They released like these boxes with like different themes. They did like a skincare one, a hair care one, a grooming one, and a makeup one. Sorry if the angle has changed. My camera died, so I had to charge it for a little bit. But I am back. So what I was saying was I picked up the Cult Beauty makeup box, and in there was the mini Nude palette. So I actually have taken it out of the box, looked at it, but I haven't used it yet. I mean, it is in my collection now. So I did kind of, I guess, break my no buy, but I did have like an exception rule, and that is like if something is on massive discount or if like something's been discontinued, something like that, I could pick it up. And the box itself was very good value, and I got this one for free in the palette, or in the box, sorry, anyway. So I decided to bite the bullet and get it. So I'm very excited about that. But I'm probably not going to use this one yet. I'm probably going to wait to add it like technically into my collection until my no buy is over, which I said was going to be Black Friday. So, you know, it's not like it's been broken like super early in the year. And again, it's not technically broken because it is within those like discount rules. But yeah, this one is now in my collection, so it is off my wish list, and it is again in my collection now. And with that, the last mini palette that is on my wish list is the mini Glam palette, which looks like this. It is, I think, again, a really nice neutral palette, and I think it would be a nice addition to my collection. So we're finally moving away from Natasha Denona, and the next eyeshadow palette that I have comes from Pat McGrath. I actually only have 1 palette left that is on my wish list from Pat McGrath, and that is the Subversive Palette, which looks like this. I have picked up all of my, or I have acquired somehow, like either picked them up or gotten them like from my friend or something like that. I mean, I purchased them from my friend as well, so I guess I have bought everything that I have. But I currently have every single palette from Pat McGrath that I want in my collection, apart from this one. So that is the last Pat McGrath palette that I have on my wish list. It's a beautiful palette. So this is one that I will pick up hopefully at some point too. Moving on, we have two palettes which I unfortunately think are discontinued, so it means that I probably might not be able to get these, but I still wanted to mention them anyway. So the first palette is the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette, which looks like this. It's a beautiful twist on a neutral palette. It has a lot of beautiful indie eyeshadow singles, like sparkly shades in it, which is something that I have loads in my collection, but I don't have them necessarily in palettes. So this is a palette that I would definitely love to pick up. But again, I do think it's discontinued, so I would have to find this one pre-loved, I think, unless they bring it back. So that is the first palette. Then the second, I think, discontinued palette is the Kaleidos Flower Punk palette. It's a beautiful palette. This is one that has been on my wish list for a long time. I didn't think I needed it, but it's just something that I can't let go of. But unfortunately, I think it is discontinued because they keep like leaving it out of stock on the website. But if I can see it somewhere, I would love to pick that one up too. So that is the next palette. Sticking with indie eyeshadow brands, we have Adept next, and the palette that I am really interested in from them is the Heather Austin palette. It looks like this. Again, it is a good mix between those like grungy kind of warm tone greens that I love, as well as like some pinkier purpley tones and some beautiful sparkles. And I'm really intrigued to try the Adept formula. I've heard loads of good things, and this palette is just stunning. So yeah, that is the next palette on my list. Another indie brand that is on my list for palettes is actually Cleona. They do have a palette that I really want from them because it contains their multichromes. And that is the Deep Sea Treasures palette, which is like this. I'm so intrigued by this palette. I think it's beautiful. There's some eyeshadows in here that I would love to have in my collection. There's the shade Saltwater Pearl, I think. And then there's the Centipede. Something like that. I can't remember what it's called. If I'm wrong, it's on screen somewhere. Those two eyeshadows specifically, I would love to have it from this palette. But overall, the eyeshadows in here are completely unique to this palette, and I would love to have it, partly to complete my Cleona eyeshadow collection, but also because I think they are stunning shades. So that is the next palette. Moving away from indie eyeshadows, I guess, I don't know if any of these brands actually are indie eyeshadows, but like the traditional term of indie eyeshadows, which you can't like buy on Sephora or Cult Beauty or anything like that. The next palette we have is from Patrick Ta. I am really keen to pick up one or two of his Major Dimension palette, probably just one. And the ones that I'm choosing between is Major Dimension 1, which looks like this. It is half matte, half shimmers, and I've heard so many good things about this palette. It is one that I really think would be beautiful to own and be a really good and staple neutral palette. So I would love to have that. Or I would go for his newest release, which is the 3, like Major Dimension 3 palette, which is a full matte palette, I believe. So not as versatile, so which makes me lean more towards the first one. But yeah, I would love to look into those more and pick up one of them as well. So that is next on my wish list. We have like a mini kind of palette next, which is the Kaja Bento Stack in Peach Madeline. I would love to pick this one up. I think it's a beautiful palette. I've heard really good things about Kaja. Also, Steph from Is to Steph has mentioned that this is her favorite, and she owns quite a few, I think. And the tones in here are used right up my alley. So it's another one that I would love to try. So we have a couple more palettes to go, not too many though. Next up we have another Rowan palette. I currently own one. I own the 75 Degrees Quad, but I would love to also own the 1111 Quad, which is the more kind of cool tone one, the more rosier one. It looks like this. I think because it has such unique textures in it, it would be a good addition to my collection. And I've heard really good things about this one. I think this one is everyone's favorite, or most people's favorite at least. So I would love to own that one too. Lastly, for palettes, we have a brand again, and I have 5 palettes from this brand that I would love to own, and that is Viseart. I recently tried Viseart for the first time with the Paris Edit palette, and I do have a couple palettes that I would love to have. Actually, all of them are matte palettes. So first up, we have the Warm Mattes palette, which looks like this. This is just like a good staple neutral matte kind of palette, warm leaning obviously. So yeah, that is the first one. Then we have the neutral matte, which again, as the name would suggest, is more of a neutral tone palette. I think having these matte eyeshadows would be such a good staple, and they would be amazing for BYOPs as well and as travel palettes. Then we have the Editorial Brights palette, which is a rainbow palette with all mattes. Again, I think this will give so much more to my collection. I don't really have a specific rainbow palette in my collection at the moment, so I would love to own this one too. We have the Cool Matte, which is very cool tone leaning, a little bit deeper, but I think, again, these tones are quite unique to my collection. Same with the last one, which is the Dark Matte, which looks like this. Again, I think this would add a lot to my collection. And I think with all of the Viseart palettes, they have like 2 sizes. I think I would be happy to have them in the small size. I am thinking about maybe picking up the neutral mattes in a larger size, because I know it can fit Cleona eyeshadows too, and I can use them to like build my own palette. But otherwise, I'm happy to have the small palettes. They're so compact, they don't take up much space, and the quality is really, really nice. So those were actually the last palettes. There's quite a few things, like I said, on my list. But lastly, before I wrap up the video, I do, of course, want to mention singles. So I'm not going to show you every single single. I'm also going to do Black Friday wish list in a couple, like, I don't know when it's going up, but it's going to be a couple of videos in the future. So I'm going to go through more in detail what is on my list then. But I do have 3 brands that I have specifically on my wish list at the moment. Top is Divina. I would love to pick up eyeshadows from Divina. I never tried the brand and I have quite a long list, but I'm not going to pick everything up straight away, I think. But I would love to try Divina. Then another brand that I would love to try is Shine by SD. I do want to pick up the Seeking Shifts bundle, the, what's it called? Earthborn bundle. I love those eyeshadows. I am dying to try those out. And then lastly, we do have Terra Moons. And Terra Moons is a brand that I have tried a lot from before. I have picked up most of my wish list prior, but they have had a couple more releases since then. So my wish list has grown a little bit, but I don't have too many things to pick up from there. So those are actually all of the things that are on my wish list at the moment. It's quite a long list, but I wanted to share with you. Let me know if you own any of these palettes, which ones are your favorite. Is there anything that I haven't mentioned that you would like me to try or that you would recommend me to try? And otherwise, I really hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye, guys!